Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today on your holiday Monday. I am very excited to be speaking to you today about the importance of sustainability in the food industry from the perspective of two of your key stakeholders, primarily from the perspective of an investor, but also from the perspective of a millennial, which I hear is a lucrative demographic these days. As Ferg mentioned, my name is Lucia von Reuser. I am the shareholder advocate for Green Century Capital Management. Green Century's investment philosophy reflects the belief that companies which manage their environmental impacts may reduce key risks and improve shareholder value. Our funds both screen out companies and industries that we consider to be environmentally degrading and redirect those investments towards companies that are demonstrating strong environmental performance. We are shareholders in many of the companies represented here today, unless you did not meet our screens for environmental performance. We are also active shareholders, meaning that we actively engage the companies in our portfolios to press for constant improvement in environmental performance in ways that we believe improves shareholder value. Green Century has been leading a growing coalition of investors that has been actively pressing companies across the food and consumer goods industries to better manage their supply chain impacts on deforestation and work towards decoupling their agricultural supply chains from deforestation. In response to these concerns, major companies across the food and consumer goods industries have announced in the past year and a half truly unprecedented commitments to ensure that key ingredients in their products would be sourced from fully traceable supply chains back to suppliers verified as protecting forests and local communities. These commitments over the past year and a half have been so dramatic and so sweeping that they are poised to disrupt traditional agricultural practices in what some have called the start of a new green agricultural revolution, whereby agricultural production could be decoupled from deforestation. This is a disruption that consumers and investors are increasingly calling for, and that every company represented here today is likely to face within the next 5 to 10 years. So today I'm going to talk to you about why investors are concerned about how companies across the food industry are managing sustainability risks and what investors look for as evidence that companies are adopting sustainable practices. The main takeaway that I want to leave you with today is that the long and short-term success of companies across the food industry may depend on developing traceable, transparent, and deforestation-free supply chains for key ingredients. I will use recent developments in the palm oil industry to highlight 3 key trends that lead me to this claim. First is that consumer preferences are shifting towards more transparent and value-driven food preferences. Second is that global food production is increasingly threatened by deforestation and is also the leading contributor to deforestation. And third is that investors are increasingly pressing companies to demonstrate how risks related to deforestation are being managed. These 3 trends serve to highlight why companies across the food industry should be paying attention to their supply chain impacts on deforestation. I will then also give a few examples of what leading companies are doing to reduce their impacts on deforestation. And then finally, I will leave you with some key performance indicators that companies and investors can use to evaluate the sustainability of their supply chains for key ingredients. So first, before we begin, I'll give you a brief overview of palm oil before I launch into using it as an example. Palm oil is the most widely used vegetable oil in the world. It is a $50 billion commodity. It is present in over half of all packaged goods, in everything from cookies to chips to makeup, soap, cleaning products, you name it. Unfortunately, cutting down trees to plant palm oil plantations has become a leading driver of tropical deforestation, which contributes significantly to climate change, biodiversity loss, and conflicts with local communities over land tenure rights. Companies that use palm oil in their products have come under fire and face significant reputational risks for purchasing palm oil from suppliers linked to these controversial practices. As a result, palm oil has become a high-profile and very controversial ingredient for companies to be purchasing. Destroying the rainforest to source key ingredients poses both long and short-term risks to companies across the food industry for several reasons. First is that consumer preferences are shifting towards more transparent and value-driven food options, and sustainability and sustainable production is becoming a key selling point. Sustainable production is closely linked to consumer trust that the food they are purchasing to feed their families has produced in a way that is transparent, sustainable, healthy, and safe, and consumer values. Food is extremely personal, and food is approached often as an expression of people's values. You are what you eat. Is it fresh? Is it local? Is it transparent? Was it produced in a way that respects the environment and local communities? Issues like rainforest destruction and exploitation of people and communities likely don't align with most consumers' values and risk violating consumers' trust in the integrity of their favorite brands. Evidence of this shifting consumer preferences towards more sustainable and transparent food options can be seen in the growth and demand for labeling of products verified as produced in a sustainable manner. On the left is a chart showing the growth in demand for certified sustainable commodities versus conventional commodities between 2008 and 2012. And on the right is the growth in demand for sustainable palm oil over the same period. Now, of course, these are niche markets, which means that the growth is much more rapid in those markets. However, consumer sustainability concerns tend to correlate with growth in incomes, so we can expect this trend to emerge in emerging markets as well. This trend is especially towards more transparent and sustainable food preferences is especially strong among millennials. I can definitely attest to that. I have spent way more than I like to admit at Whole Foods on my groceries. This chart on the left shows the findings of a survey conducted by Boston Consulting Group that surveyed millennials on how they expected their purchasing habits to change over the next 12 months. And you can see that purchases of sustainable and organic products went up relative to other purchases. This shift in consumer preferences and increased interest in where food comes from and how it was produced means that companies are increasingly linked to the practices and reputations of their suppliers. In the case of palm oil, consumers became very upset when their favorite brands were found to be coming at the expense of the rainforest, thanks to activist campaigns that drew those links between companies and their supply chains. Consumers connect with brands because of the values that those brands stand for, and companies that face severe reputational risks if they fail to uphold those values throughout their supply chains. The shifting consumer preferences towards more transparent and sustainable food options presents both reputational risks but also leadership opportunities for companies around their sourcing practices. Companies that are facing pressure from consumers or activist groups around sustainability issues have a choice. They can either choose to try to ignore these concerns and hope they go away, which is unlikely to happen, or they can view these concerns as an opportunity to innovate and take a leadership role. So my main point here is that consumer preferences are shifting towards more transparent and value-driven food options, meaning that sustainability issues like deforestation presents both reputational risks, but also leadership opportunities for companies across the food industry. So you may be wondering, why should companies across the food industry be concerned about deforestation in particular? what is the link between deforestation and food production? Well, deforestation poses a significant risk to global food security. Deforestation is a major driver of soil degradation, shifting rainfall patterns, climate change, and land conflicts with local communities over land tenure issues. Current agricultural practices severely degrade the very topsoil that agriculture depends on. The Food and Agricultural Organization warns that 1/3 of global topsoil is heavily degraded, and we are on track to lose all of it within 60 years. And the main culprit of that is current mechanized farming practices, primarily large-scale clearance of forests. Deforestation also has a significant impact in shifting rainfall patterns. Recent studies have shown that deforestation leads to a direct decline in local rainfall patterns on an order of 10 to 15%, and shifts global rainfall patterns around the world. The reason for this is that forests act as a natural water pump, absorbing water from the soil through their roots and evaporating it through their leaves, forms clouds, rain falls, and that's the hydrological. When forests are cleared, that cycle is broken. Finally, deforestation is a major driver of climate change. Forests are the lungs of our planet. They absorb carbon dioxide and emit oxygen. When forests are cleared, it releases massive amounts of greenhouse gas emissions and is a leading driver of climate change. Deforestation contributes the same amount of greenhouse gas emissions as the entire global transportation sector. These headlines from financial newspapers in 2014 serve to illustrate that the agricultural sector is particularly sensitive to extreme weather events due to climate change. And finally, companies in the food industry should be particularly focused on deforestation because production of agricultural commodities is the single leading driver of deforestation. So while every sustainability issue is complex and multifaceted, the agricultural sector has a disproportionate ability to influence this issue. So hopefully you're getting a better sense of why investors are concerned about how companies are managing sustainability risks like deforestation. Investor activism pressing companies to better manage their risks related to climate change has a strong history, and reducing deforestation is increasingly recognized as one of the most cost-effective and immediate strategies for tackling climate change. Green Century, as I mentioned, leads a coalition of investors that has been actively pressing many companies to better manage their impacts on deforestation and adopt sustainable sourcing practices. This coalition has been rapidly growing as more institutional investors recognize the short and long-term risks associated with deforestation. In fact, last year, a record number of investors representing $15 trillion in assets under management pressed companies in their portfolios to enhance disclosure around how risks related to deforestation were being managed by those companies. And then just as a broader context in the background, the philosophy of sustainable investing is rapidly going mainstream as more institutional investors recognize the link between sustainability risks and shareholder value. This quote from Warren Buffett illustrates why investors are increasingly concerned about how companies are managing sustainability risks. I'm not sure if I can read it from this far away. He says, quote, "Today our world is changing faster than ever before. Economic, geopolitical, and environmental challenges abound. In times such as these, a company must invest in the key ingredients of profitability, its people, communities, and the environment. Taking shortcuts is not the pathway to achieving sustainable competitive advantage, nor is it an avenue towards satisfying customers." I would say that quote directly reflects Green Century's investment philosophy. This tweet below is from the New York State Comptroller, which manages the New York State pension funds, which are the third largest pension funds in the nation, announcing that ConAgra Foods had agreed to dramatically reduce deforestation in its palm oil supply chain in response to a shareholder proposal filed by the pension funds about these concerns. So my key point here is that investors increasingly recognize the link between sustainability risks like deforestation and shareholder value, and are pressing companies to improve their environmental performance in ways that benefits shareholder value. So now that I've covered the 3 reasons and trends why companies across the food industry should be paying attention to their supply chain impacts on deforestation, and again, those trends are, shifts in consumer preferences, global food security threatened by deforestation, and growing interest from investors, I'm going to give a few quick examples of what leading companies are doing to reduce deforestation in their supply chains, and then cover some key performance indicators that companies and investors can use. Over the past year and a half, over 20 major consumer goods companies have responded to investor and consumer concerns by announcing time-bound commitments to develop fully traceable, deforestation-free palm oil supply chains. These companies include household brands like that are some of the top palm oil consuming companies globally, like Conagra, Safeway, Smucker's, Kellogg's, Dunkin' Donuts, Mars, General Mills. If you see any of those companies here today, thank them. They are taking massive steps forward in taking on leadership roles on this issue. So what exactly do these sustainable sourcing commitments look like? They include time-bound commitments, a commitment to tracing the commodity back to its origin to verify the conditions under which it was produced. There are protections for the main environmental and social risks associated with that commodity, commitment to independent verification. They go beyond certification where necessary to address key sustainability risks, and they demonstrate an understanding of key sustainability issues specific to that commodity. And I should also mention, as Jack mentioned earlier, they are also site-specific. The impact of these commitments is that suppliers suddenly began hearing from some of the top brand name companies in the world that destroying the rainforest and exploiting local communities to produce palm oil was no longer an acceptable business practice. In response to this unprecedented demand, companies representing over 90% of the global palm oil trade have announced in the past year and a half that the palm oil they trade will be fully traceable and deforestation-free. This is unprecedented. The palm oil industry is at a tipping point and is poised to be the first agricultural commodity supply chain to potentially decouple production from deforestation. And it is because of the insistence of companies across the food industry and consumer goods industries that recognize the risks associated with unsustainable production. Now, of course, comes the hard part, which is implementing these commitments. Investors are going to continue pressing companies to report on progress towards implementing these commitments. These are some key performance indicators that companies and investors should look for as evidence that sustainable sourcing goals and risks related to deforestation are being reduced. They include evidence of supplier risk assessments, a description of the independent auditing and verification measures, regular reporting on relevant metrics that demonstrate progress against the sourcing goals. For example, what % of the supply chain is traceable? What % is sourced from certified sources? What % is sourced from suppliers in full compliance with the company's policy, which I listed earlier? And then an honest description of the challenges. So to conclude, controversies in the palm oil industry illustrate that deforestation poses a growing risk to companies across the food industry. I talked about three trends that illustrate why companies should be paying attention to their supply chain impacts on deforestation. Again, those are shifting consumer preferences, deforestation as a threat to global security, and 3, investor interest. The main takeaway that I want to leave you with today is that the long and short-term success of companies across the food industry may depend on developing fully traceable, transparent, and deforestation-free supply chains for key ingredients, and that sustainability should be approached as a key element of food quality and safety. Although the challenge of deforestation is systemic and widespread, major brands have significant leverage over their supply chains and are increasingly taking the lead in developing solutions for the deforestation-free future that consumers and investors are increasingly calling for, and that the viability of the food industry needs in order to survive. Thank you.